Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. All right. Welcome to the Mikestand. Today is Tuesday, June the 10th, 2025. Of course, we're going to give people a chance to come in before we get started. I hope everybody's having a good week thus far. Of course, as some of you may know, here in Southern California, we're having quite a bit of drama going on, as there's been some some quote unquote protests, more like riots. But we're not going to go too deep into that because that's not what we're here for. We're, of course, going to talk about more fun stuff. Well, anyways, yeah, so today, of course, actually, as part of my cartoon watching, saw the first of the Captain the Kid series that was done by MGM back in 1938. Of course, they're based on the Rudolph Dirks newspaper strip that was itself a parody of another of Dirk's creations called Katzenjammer Kids. So Captain and Mama and Fritz and Hans, cleaning house where basically Mama is trying to get everybody else to help her out clean, with spring cleaning. She catches the captain slacking off, only for him to feign ill, and then you had a lot of madcap adventures after she ends up calling the doctors. So, anyways, the Captain and Kids, of course, more or less replaced Happy Harmony as in 1937. Hugh Harman and Rudolph Ising would eventually be fired for going over budget on their cartoon, the Happy Harmony series, only for for Bill Hanna, for Fred Quimby, Bill Hanna, and Joe Barbera to take over, as MGM decided to start up their own in-house cartoon studio, MGM Cartoon Studio, which of course today is known as MGM Animation. So now we're past the 3 minute. We're coming up on 3.5 minutes. I guess I'll talk about what's on tap for tonight. So tonight we've got a couple of articles we're gonna go over. One from Bounding in the Comics, one from Bleeding Fool. The Bounding in the Comics one is these two articles are gonna kind of like mirror each other in a way, because kind of giving different perspectives on one of the big issues of the culture of the animation culture wars over the past few years here. So you got Megumi Hayashibara, legendary voice actress in Japan, legendary Seiryu in Japan, voice actress. She, of course, the Japanese voice for Rei Ayanami in Evangelion, among other. She's giving her perspective on, and really the Japanese perspective on the whole thing in regards to the censorship and all that. And then we're going to also look at an article from Bleeding Fool, where they're talking about how Christopher Priest surprisingly race swapped a Black Panther character. So get into all that. Plus, of course, we'll do the rest and wrap up. Look back to last night's Raw. Look ahead to tonight's NXT. They talk about some of the latest happenings in the wrestling world. And then, of course, we'll wrap things up with This Day in Each History. So with all that being said, let's see, we're now past the 5 minute mark, so why don't we go ahead and get started then? Let's get to our first article of the evening. Alrighty then. So, Evangelion Rei Ayanami, VA, believes, quote, invasive species, unquote, quote unquote, threaten Japan's cultural identity, quote, our freedom of expression, like anime, might all be at risk, unquote. Of course, I believe this is her talking about what's been going on, with many of the globalists trying to force Japan to censor and meet the needs of the left's viewpoints. But so article by Spencer McCooley published earlier today. So let's go ahead and take a look at this and see what she has to say about all this. So, in the face of what she believes to be a growing indifference from her fellow citizens when it comes to the ideas of respecting their own cultural identity, the Japan voice actor for Rei Ayanami in Neon Genesis Evangelion franchise, Megumi Hayashibara, again, a long-time, well-known Seiryu, that's what they call voice act. That's a term in Japanese for a voice actor or actress is Seiryu. Of course, aside from, of course, a number of different voices, she's also sang a number of themes as well for many animes as well. So you can hear her vocals on, like I think one of them in particular. Let's see, the Saber Marionette series not only provides the voice of one of the lead characters, but also does some of the songs for that as well. It's calling on the country's leadership to redirect their political towards their own constituents. Hayashibara, who across her storied 30-year voice acting career has also brought to life such other anime and video game characters as Lena Inverse in Slayers. Now, remember, she's the Japanese voice of these characters. I know, like Rei Ayanami, of course, was voiced by Amanda Wynn Lee in the States here. Lena Inverse by Lisa Ortiz in the States. Jessie in Pokemon, who was, of course, done by Rachel Lillis and Michelle Knotts. Sage and Sonic Frontiers, I don't know who the English voice was for that, offered her thoughts on the current state of her home nation via a post made to her official blog, as hosted by Japanese social media platform Amoeba. In opening her post, as per a machine translation provided by ChatGPT, and reviewed by this article's author, the voice actor began by admitting that when it came to her current view of Japan, quote, is this really okay? I'm honestly starting to feel really anxious, unquote. From there, Hayashibara proceeded to recall how, quote, after I featured a Korean YouTuber, in brackets, their name withheld by the voice actor, unbracketed, a Korean friend contacted me. They told me that right now in Korea, there's a lot of tension and division between the political right and left. If I make a comment that seems like I support the right, it could hurt people on the left, and vice versa. If I appear to support the left, the right will be upset. They scolded me, saying I could end up, quote, fueling unnecessary conflict, unquote. Quote, the truth is, by casually featuring someone as an outsider, in smaller quotes there, I could unintentionally hurt people, unquote. She added, quote, I know it's a bit late and maybe I'm just adding fuel to the fire, but if I hurt anyone, I'm truly sorry. I removed that part of my from my content. She shouldn't have had to do that. Okay, she should not have had to do that. Sometimes you just have to let things be. Don't worry about what everybody else is gonna say. That's kind of what's going on here in the states. People are getting too worked up, and that's allowing the bad actors to win here. You know, I can't reach those I've already hurt, but I hope at least no more people will be hurt because of this. Unquote. After addressing the apparent fallout from her apparent collaboration with a Korean YouTuber, Hayashibara turned to offer a slight bit of pushback to her critics. In doing so, declaring, quote, I know this short message might not get across everything I want to say, but what really breaks my heart is how cold and indifferent Japan seems to be toward itself. How we become apathetic even about raising our voices. It's unquote, kind of funny because that's exactly what you just did here. Kind of funny she says that because that's kind of what she just did there. She kind of fell in line and decided to like silence herself because as not to offend anybody. If they're that easily offended and that easily turn away from you, then they really weren't your friends to begin with, or were your friends to begin with. Quote, no rice in Japan, unquote. She then questioned, referring to the country's ongoing shortage of the grain itself caused by a triple combo of inflation, poor crop performances, and increased demand due to the recent surge of tourists. Quote, meanwhile, Japanese students are getting scholarships, which they have to pay back. To put it bluntly, that's debt, unquote. To this end, the voice behind Cowboy Bebop's Dave Valentine, who, of course, the English voice for that is Wendy Lee, um, declared, quote, this warped reality connects to the need to stop leaving things to others. We have to go vote, unquote. Quote, we can't afford to say things like whatever, in smaller quote, or smaller quote, nothing's going to change, unquote, she argued. Well, I applaud her for that. I applaud her for that realization that particularly if you are in some form of democratic or even constitutional republic society, whatever your form of government is, if it does call for you to be, if it does call for its citizens to participate, and you have the opportunity to participate, you should participate as much as you can, best you can. Um, we're already at a point, and we'll quote here, she argued, we're already at a point where that kind of attitude won't cut it. If this keeps up, what makes Japan Japan? Our manners, behavior, skills, and even our freedom of expression, like anime, might all be at risk. True. That is very true. That is very true. check something here real quick. Get some. Yeah, I mean, Megumi Hayashibara has been around, as I said, for 30 years, so that would have obviously been back in the 90s. Born in 1967, which would make her 58 now, because March 30th sometimes goes by the nononym of Megumi. But she's done it all. She's been a voice actress, a singer, very talented woman. Singer, lyricist, radio personality from Kita Ward in Tokyo. So, and as always, guys, if you haven't already, if you guys can help out by liking and sharing the stream, see if we can get some more friendly people to engage, that'd be appreciated. Also, if anything here grabs your attention, feel free to comment and or ask questions. I'll try to answer the questions to the best of my ability. So, as we continue on now, continue on here. Turning her attention to the country's aforementioned tourism boom, Hayashibara then asserted, quote, at the same time, there are some poorly behaved guests in air bomb style accommodations. Some tourists who don't understand the idea of yielding to others. Some who even cut down bamboo in Kyoto. Without proper regulation and enforcement, it's seriously dangerous, unquote. Quote, just like how Japanese crayfish got wiped out in no time by invasive species, unquote, she said. Quote, if we don't do something, even our unspoken rule of lining up in order might become a disadvantage. I'm not trying to attack any specific country, but I do believe Japanese tax money should first and foremost be used to support the people who pay those taxes. In parentheses, including foreign residents who pay taxes, of course, unparenthesed, and to help disaster-stricken areas in Japan and support students who are currently holding Japan up, unquote. Sounds pretty reasonable. Drawing her thoughts on the matter to a close, Hayashibara addressed what she ostensibly believed would be the main criticism of her statement, declaring, quote, would that be considered xenophobic? If Japan itself falls apart, we won't even be able to offer hospitality anymore. Which is true. And it's not, it's not, it's not xenophobic to basically ask somebody who comes to your home to behave themselves. Okay? It's not xenophobic if somebody's going to come to your home as a guest. It's not xenophobic to expect them to behave themselves, to be polite, to be courteous, to not overstep boundaries or overstay their welcome, because you are a guest in their home. That's kind of one of the problems we have here in the States as well, But now Japan historically, yeah, they were at one point an isolationist country prior to, Commander Perry or Commodore Perry, visiting Japan back in the late 19th century there. That's what led to the whole Meiji Restoration, I believe. People like from the States and other parts of the world wanted them to open themselves up to the world. They didn't really want to, but they were ultimately forced to. But it's not xenophobic to basically expect people who come to your home as guests to behave themselves, to be polite and courteous, not overstep the boundaries and overstay their welcome. Um, Quote, yes, the slush fund scandals are worse and a huge problem too, unquote, she concluded. In doing so, making reference to Japan's 2023-2024 slush fund scandal, quote, but right now, I just want to say this. If you have the right to vote, in parentheses from 18 years old, please really think about what that right means, unquote. Quote, political statements are tough, in parentheses, the voice actor ultimately admitted, in parentheses, but I had to say this. I applaud her for acknowledging her convictions and and at least, whether or not you agree with what she has to say, it did take a lot of courage to get up and say it to people and make her thoughts known, especially knowing that she could alienate half of her half of her audience. Now, mind you, here she did it a lot better than a lot of people here in the States do it. A lot of our celebrities here in the States do it, because she actually did it from a place and heart of not wanting to upset people. She did it more out of legitimate concern, where a lot of our celebrity elites, when they make their political statements, do it from a place of arrogance, almost like, yeah, you should, she's got the right heart and attitude here. She appreciates her fans, and she'll tell you what she thinks, but she won't belittle you if you don't agree with her. Unlike many of the celebrity elites here in the States. So there's something to think about. All right, and that's, I guess, it right there. But I do, as I said, I do applaud, Megumi for speaking her mind in the way she did it. It was very humble. It was direct, but still very humble. I think many of our celebrity elites should take note. Anyways, and now let's get ready to move on to the next article, of course. I'll go grab it here real quick. Actually, I do need to step away from the computer for a moment, so I'll be right back. But before I do that, music on. You guys know me. I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. So now let's go ahead and let me go grab get the next article here, the second and most likely final article of the evening. This is a Christopher Priest article I was, of course, talking about. And again, of course, if you guys haven't already, you guys can like and share the stream. See if we can get some more friendly people to engage. That'd be appreciated. Also, if anything here grabs your attention, feel free to comment and or ask questions. I'll try to answer the question to the best of my ability. So, with that being said, let's take a look at this next article here. Writer Christopher Priest, surprising race swap of Black Panther. Article by Avi Green, published today. I wonder if this has anything to do with what's been talked about recently with like the Katema and all that. But I guess we'll find out soon enough here. So, Adventures in Poor Taste interviewed Priest about his new Black Panther series with Joe Quesada under the revised use of the Marvel Knights line, where T'Challa may end up going to the Great Reward. All right. So in 1998, Christopher Priest was part of an elite group of writers tasked with crafting high-quality stories for Marvel Comics characters under a brand new imprint, Marvel Knights. The series launched standalone titles that offered fresh takes on age-old heroes, often brandishing a darker edge and grit. Priest's Black Panther run was one of its pillar tentpoles. And that book took T'Challa in brave and daring new directions that inevitably ingratiated the character for a new generation. Okay, so now back to Avi here. So we went to the article, now back to Avi here. One of those quote unquote fresh takes included Brian Bendis' direction with Daredevil. Memory serves, getting his secret identity revealed, and there were even worse directions taken with Hornhead's stories, including the tale by Kevin Smith that set the Knights edition in motion, where Karen Page was killed by Mysterio just a few issues in. I'm sorry, but when they speak of quote-unquote edgy, they fail to be clear what they actually mean. And the Knights edition of Captain America was insufferable with its Blame America direction post 9/11. And as for this new Black Panther tale from the Revived Knights line, Priest says it took a while to complete. So now back to the article he's referencing here. Perhaps the most surprising aspect of this is of course the thing we were talking about the other day too, where they revealed that T'Challa apparently had, or they tried to insinuate it. I don't know if it was actually true or not, that T'Challa had a white son, as it were. The most surprising aspect of the world to come is when it's been finished for quite some time. Quote, that was written a long, long time ago, unquote, Priest said with a laugh. Quote, it's taken Joe Quesada a long time to draw this book, and not because he's slow, unquote. Priest explained that Quesada's job as Marvel's executive vice president and creative director took a toll on the comic's release schedule, putting the project on hold until time was right. That time, however, is now. So back to Avi here. Avi's response to what was just said there. I seem to recall several books were fashionably late when Quesada was EIC, like The Black Cat miniseries. The aforementioned Smith wrote, but was delayed in completion for nearly 2 years. And even then, the finished product, establishing Felicia Hardy had been a SA victim, was abominable and wasn't worth the wait. Many mainstream press sources, unshockingly, gloss over the worst moments of Quesada's tenure as Marvel's EIC, executive in charge. If he couldn't get certain items published on time, couldn't get his contributors to commit to schedule, what is there to appreciate in his time as their EIC? And then returning to the main subject, Priest makes matters worse with the following. As per the article here, quote, I did 60 issues of Black Panther, unquote, Priest said. Quote, I did everything with that character that I could think of at the time, including blasting him into outer space. Ta-Nehisi Coates acquitted himself much better in that regard, unquote. Back to Avi here, and Avi's response to that. Well, this sure doesn't make me think very highly of a guy who, to my knowledge, does happen to be left-wing himself, and whose record is very mediocre as a whole. If Priest is going to sugarcoat a writer who made divisive political statements, he's only making me lose more respect for him than I'd like to. Why? What makes Coates' writing any better than, say, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's? The former, who's probably just mentioned once here. Priest continues. Back to the article. Monica Rial turns 50 in October. Actually, so do I. Here's an Bark. Here's a little interesting little tidbit for you. I'm actually 2 days younger than Monica Rial. I know what you're talking about. She was born October 5th, 1975. I was born October 7th, 1975. The day I was born, of course, was the day that Carlton Fisk hit that home run in the 1975 World Series that pushed the series to a Game 7. I also happen to share the October 7, 1975. I also happen to share that birthday with professional wrestler Rhino, Terry Guerin. He and I both turned 50 on that day, 2 days after Monica Rial does. So, and then of course I think Jamie Markey's her date of birth is October 8th, but that's in 1977. So she's like 2 years. Jamie Markey is like 2 years and a day younger than me and Rhino. So she turns 48 then. So just some interesting little tidbits there for you. But anyways, back to the article here. Quote, I can't read that stuff without cringing, unquote, Priest said. Quote, like, wow, really? Unquote. I felt like wow, really? I felt like maybe the first couple of issues were pretty decent back then. Joe and I were having a difference of opinion about, like, I was really focused on increasing readership by bringing more aspects of the Marvel Universe into what we were doing. Joe wanted Marvel Knights to be more insular, like the Netflix Marvel series, where they didn't deny the MCU, but they weren't not worried about them. As Priest admitted, quote, 30 years later, I go, yeah, Joe was right, unquote. Even so, Priest didn't shy away from including more out there characters in Black Panther. Quote, I had the Hulk go to a big disco, unquote, Priest said. Quote, this fun part was this in Smalls with enemy of state stuff, where it's revealed that Black Panther only joined the Avengers to spy on them, and that pissed off a lot of readers. Oops, PR, a lot of readers, unquote. Okay, so let's see now. Um, Now back to Avi speaking here. Whether it was more insular, the problem with the writers assigned to the Knight's Line is that their directions later wound up influencing the flagship titles in the long run. The Knight's Line ran about 8 years before discontinuation. Honestly, the whole notion Black Panther just joined Avengers to spy upon them is decidedly cringeworthy because it contradicts the premise. T'Challa is a dedicated crime fighter. And what about the Marvel Knights volume of Captain America along with Daredevils? There wasn't anything to cringe about there. If it really wasn't part of what until that time was 616 universe continuity proper. It's decidedly a relief, but even so, that doesn't make it immediately acceptable to depict Black Panther as though he's doing something bad to his best buddies. And back to the article here, back to the article that Avi is referencing here. All right. Priest continued by talking about the realities of the industry and the difficulties he had to deal with when writing Black Panther as a part of the larger Marvel machine. Quote, once we transitioned Panther back to the Marvel Universe, I came under enormous pressure to raise sales. Parentheses there, Priest said. Quote, or unquote. Um, Quote, it's always a big mistake to subjugate creativity to commerciality. I think that at some point, the retailers are the ones who are gonna set the tone, um, where they will buy a first issue of almost anything. Um, but those numbers will go down with number 2 and collapse with number 3. And at some point, um, around number 4 or 5, those numbers will settle into where the retailers think this is where the demand is, and there's no escaping it. There's no getting around it. And once those numbers settle in, the publisher has to decide, quote, do you want to keep going or not? But if you're gonna keep going, I think you have to dance with the ones who wrung you, unquote. As a counter to that dynamic, Priest is acutely aware of who he and his fellow writers' focus should be when telling stories. Quote, our obligation was to the fans who were reading the book, and we should stop turning ourselves inside out, trying to attract those who are not, unquote, Priest said. Well, that sounds logical if not they're not doing it, even though they may not be doing it. Unfortunately, that's just what Quesada and Bill Jemas were doing, and even the latter's successor, Dan Buckley, did pretty much the same. If we take Smith and J. Michael Straczynski as examples, along with Garth Ennis and Grant Morrison, they were trying to use quote-unquote celebrities whose audiences might follow them to whatever mainstream comics they wrote, and rely on them for money-making, based additionally on their political and ideological perspectives. And it didn't matter if the specific writers didn't understand or respect the series in question, as seen in Straczynski's run on Spider-Man. Even Bendis' run on Daredevil was pretentious. And then these same writers continued to get jobs with Marvel DC, even though they have no talent for writing their stable of characters. And then back to the article that Avi was referencing here. Priest added, quote, I did my part, but Black Panther has a lot of dads. Not the least of which, of course, is Ta-Nehisi and Brian Stelfreeze, in parentheses here, who is not mentioned nearly enough, unparenthesed. A lot of what you see in the motion picture is derivative of Brian Stelfreeze. There's a lot of Brian on that screen, and nobody ever talks about Brian, and that's a little irritating, and I'm guilty of that, unquote. Now back to Avi here, and his response to what we just read there. What's irritating here is Priest boomerang back on sugarcoating Coates' resume at the expense of Lee as much as Kirby. I'm sorry, but I don't think any of these writers since the turn of the century have proven themselves the most truly worthy successors to Stan the Man and Jack on any of the comics published under the Ninth imprint. Now, I guess from Avi's perspective, I guess these writers and artists, these current writers and artists, the current generation of artists from Marvel and DC, just simply put, don't know jack about what they're doing. Again, if you haven't already, you guys can help out by liking and sharing the stream. See if we can get some more friendly people to engage. That'd be appreciated. Also, if anything here grabs your attention, feel free to comment and or ask questions. I'll try to answer the questions to the best of my ability. So with that being said, let's continue on with the article here as we get back to the article that Avi is referencing here. Aside from praising Izanov, Priest is quick to note that Quesada is more than the artist. He's also the co-plotter of the book, in parentheses, and not in name only. Quote, the story is as much Joe's as it is mine, unquote, Priest said. Quote, which is why I kept insisting, and then finally demanding, in parentheses, in smaller quotes here, do not print this book if you don't put his name first. He needs to take the lead position on the story. The stories by both of us, unquote. Let's see what Abi's response to that statement is. Quesada's involvement is decidedly but one reason I'd rather avoid this new series based on where it's going. So now back to the article that Avi's referencing here. Back to the meat of the story. Black Panther, in parentheses, Priest says that he's not trying to hide his death whatsoever. Quote, oh, he dies on page 2. So, in small quote, whoa, what happened here? Did somebody put something in his soup? I guess it's supposed to be well, not will. Well, you're going to have to read to find out, unquote, Priest said. Quote, the story is not about him dying. It's about how we got to this point. And I think that's the more significant thing. That's the good stuff that we don't want to reveal. Priest added, quote, we know sooner or later everybody dies. Now the question is what happens to all the toys? It's very scary if Black Panther dies because he's got a lot of toys that we know about and a lot of toys we don't know about. And we established in our series 30 years ago and that in a desk drawer he's got all these plans for how to defeat, Batman. He knows how to take down Galactus. He's got all these contingency plans, or as Jack Nicholson said in small quote, all these marvelous toys, unsmall quote. So the crisis is what now? Okay, Black Panther's dead. What now? And an Avi response here. And this sounds like a failure to make a proper distinction between fiction and reality, or more precisely, to understand that the way in which T'Challa goes down has long become revolting and forced. Speaking of T'Challa's demise, Priest recalls the controversy he encountered when first writing the character. So back to the article that Avi's referencing here. Quote, we got a lot of hate mail because I gave Black Panther an iPhone, unquote, Priest said. Quote, and this was long before there was such a thing. And we kept getting those hate mails about how absurd it was that he had this device that could talk to people, and there's video. How absurd, And I'm like, and Smile goes, well, first of all, go back to Fantastic Four number 52. This guy was a high-tech genius, unquote. Now, of course, going back to Avi here, assuming this is factual, I will definitely agree. It's bizarre certain segment of smaller quote fandom wouldn't want T'Challa to be portrayed as a master technologist and scientist, as he was in the Silver Age upon debut and seemed almost oblivious to how this was sci-fi. This was a sci-fi universe as it is. I'm guessing it's just some troublemakers who didn't really care about Marvel Comics anyway. But this doesn't excuse the cheap path they're taking now, even if T'Challa's demise is only brief. Back to the article that Avi is referencing here. Quote, I really believe that subversiveness and new ideas are what's needed, unquote, Priest said. Quote, that's that there's really too much of this mimicry of the Silver Age going on these days. Writers can be afraid to break the toys given to them, but playing it safe doesn't lead to interesting stories. It makes forgettable ones. Quote, there can be these people that grew up reading comics, unquote, Priest said, quote, where they finally got their hands on Spider-Man, and now they want to do what they've always done when what we need is real innovation. And you need people who are not going to treat them like they're precious, and are going to take chances. And if you fail, it's comics. We bring people back from the dead all the time, but we need to try and get characters out of cul-de-sacs. On the other hand, Priest respects the original material, but he doesn't stop there. He uses it as a jumping off point to modernize the character and take them to places they've never been. Oh, this was a pretty long article. Huh. Well, superheroes don't die as they stop aging once they become adults, and always are resurrected from death. Hmm. And this obscures, so this is back to Avi here, and this obscures the grievous errors um, made when J. Michael Straczynski was writing Spidey. I guess it's okay if he breaks the toys for the sake of making both Gwen Stacy and Mary J. Watson look awful. Please. Also, how is Priest respecting the original tales if he had Black Panther spy upon Earth's mightiest heroes? That's hardly an admirable act. Um, and what new ideas are there today in an industry where left-wing politics dictate the narrative? That's why, in the long run, it's failing. I do need to take a moment, step away from the camera for a quick moment. I'll be right back. So I'm going to put some music on for you guys. I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. I saw that there was a. So let me take care of that real quick. I saw a comment here. I think T'Challa spied on the Avengers originally. Hmm. Yeah. So back to the article here. People keep thinking because he's wearing his costume that he's a hero or that he's somehow noble or even a moral leader, quote unquote, Priest said. Quote, he's none of those things. He's the sovereign of a nation. That responsibility is the only thing he cares about. And Black Panther's always doing like terrible things behind people's backs. Oh boy. Because that's the nature, he's a sneaky guy and he's always stayed at least 5 steps ahead of his enemies, unquote. Let's see how Avi responds to that. But if he was written doing terrible things to good people, is that a good example? Hardly. At the end, Priest says, back to the article, of course, quote, our Black Panther is our world to come, unquote, Priest said. Quote, it's completely our own vision of the near future. It is not tied to any other bit of Marvel continuity, which gives us enormous freedom to do things like have Lockjaw show up. So we're very happy about that. I'm glad that's finally coming out. It's been a long and interesting journey, unquote. And this is Avi's response to that statement. Even if this is similar to a recent Submariner tale set in the future, and it's still coming way too long, and I personally am not interested in owning the Night series, I vaguely remember seeing a volume on a store shelf many years ago, but couldn't decide and never got the chance in the end to buy it. But now that I own 3 epic collections, gathering all of the most essential tales, what difference does it make? Far as I'm concerned, I have the whole true Black Panther run in my collection, and that's what counts. Now, as if this couldn't get stupefying enough, comic book says Priest and Quesada have now done what until recently most might not have thought them capable of doing, as they would with a white protagonist. They're conceiving what could be called a reverse race swap. Yes, and this is a story that's been kind of being covered, and we kind of covered this portion of it too. So back to the comic book article. Marvel Knights: The World to Come comes from the creative team of Joe Quesada, Christopher Priest, Richard Isanove, Richard Starkings, and Comic Craft's Tyler Smith. Much of the conflict takes place in the Republic of Wakanda, 8 years before the world to come. An older T'Challa is engaged in a tribal challenge against his son Katema to decide who will rule over Wakanda. Katema is wearing full-body Black Panther costume, keeping his identity a secret. However, it's made clear that T'Challa is his father, and we're assuming it's by blood. We flash back to T'Challa's marriages to Storm and Monica Lynn, with Monica shown to be pregnant with a boy. The tribal challenge between T'Challa and Katema continues until the boy finally gets the upper hand on his father. Katema stands above a bloodied T'Challa and takes off his mask to reveal that he's a white male with blonde hair. Obviously, this is a pretty big development for the king of an African nation. Is Monica Lynn Katema's mother? Is T'Challa his biological father? The finale of Marvel Knights: The World to Come #1 opens up several questions. It's worth pointing out that when we flash back to T'Challa returning to Monica to propose in the rain, she ditches her significant other at the time, who appears to be a white male, to accept T'Challa's proposal. Perhaps he is secretly Katema's father, but T'Challa helped raise the boy as if he were his own. However, Katema clearly had resentment towards T'Challa. He mentions being raised by the clerics of Wakanda, possibly since the king of Wakanda couldn't be seen raising a white child. T'Challa also calls Katema his only son, but the cover of Marvel Knights The World to Come, number 3, shows T'Challa standing with a black boy and a white boy, signifying that they are both meant to be his sons. It's a lot to digest, which makes reading each future chapter all the more appealing. Let's see what Avi has to say here in response. Forget it. All this makes clear is that, given the chance, woke writers can and will make a mockery out of a black protagonist at the drop of a hat, and that they're definitely willing to troll the audience when it could be completely avoided. Most hilarious is how they make the new character blonde, when they could just have, as made him a redhead or dark haired. This controversy baiting tale may not end with T'Challa remaining in the afterlife, but it's still appalling that they even have to spend so much money for its making, all under the defense of quote unquote creativity and even being quote unquote edgy. Being matters worse, comic book movie also comes off sounding like this is okay. And maybe it's not a shock they take that position at all. Back to the article, of course, that they're referencing here. The Marvel Knights The World to Come collection has just launched with its first issue and is already revolutionizing social media and conversation. Among those who closely follow the comic book universe. And no wonder the new bearer of the Black Panther mantle is an unexpected controversial figure, for many difficult to fit in. The reason the new Black Panther is white. So I'm almost done with this article. This is actually a lot longer article than I thought it would be, but it should be noted. So this is Avi finishing up his thoughts here. It should be noted that the real reason this is appalling is because these kind of stories aren't built on writing merit, but on controversy baiting and putting a new protagonist into a costume at the original wearer's expense. One of the most grating problems about this kind of story is that it also relies on the notion a veteran hero can only pass on the baton by dying. It won't be a surprise if some will say Priest a sellout to a form of wokeness that was bound to happen, perhaps by being naive to the notion of black and Asian protagonists were immune in contrast to whites. But as we're learning fast, that's clearly not the case. Anyway, based on Quesada's involvement with the writing as much as the art, that's why it'd be best to avoid this story and not pay all the money they're surely hoping people will pay for the sake of a story that's unlikely to be widely widely discussed in the coming decades. Stories built and marketed based on trolling the audience and dedicated fans do not have high value. And as is rather obvious today, the time's long past where Marvel books like these could work anyway. Let's also remember Quesada was part and parcel to Spider-Man's downfall as a comic, and the Knight's imprint was decidedly overrated, including the take on Daredevil, where last time I looked, the demise of Karen Page still remains canon, no matter what continuity it's set in. Plus, what Marvel Universe is there now, where Black Panther could be transferred back to. All a shambles. Today, no thanks to Quesada for one. And I guess Clownfish TV did a video on it that he linked here. So that's it for that story. Wow, that one took quite a bit of while. I was hoping to be done with the whole show by an hour, but it looks like we're going to be running over tonight a little bit. So already at hour 7. So with that, I'm going to go to the wrestling wrap up real quick, and then we'll get to the This Day in Each History, and then we'll wrap things up. So we're going to try to really just shoot through everything real quickly. So tonight we're going to just look back to last night's WWE Raw, as well as look ahead to tonight's NXT, seeing what's going down. Oh, there we go. Okay, so as WWE is preparing for the next couple of pay-per-views coming up, the King and Queen of the Ring, Night of Champions. Actually, the King and Queen tournament is happening at Night of the So Night of the Champions and that's okay. Night of the Champions and Evolution, the all women's pay per view next month. Let's take a look what happened on last night's SmackDown. So the show opened up with AJ Styles. Okay, so the show actually opened up with a promo between John Cena and CM Punk, where CM Punk challenged Cena for the undisputed title, only for the match to be set up for Night of Champions in Saudi Arabia. Then the first match of the evening saw AJ Styles defeat Chad Gable, who had some unsuccessful help from the Creed brothers, American Made, but defeated Chad Gable with the Styles Clash. In the first fatal four-way Queen of the Ring qualifying match, Roxanne Perez defeated Kairi Sane, Liv Morgan, and Rhea Ripley, as they seem to be pushing Roxanne Perez quite a bit since calling her up to the main roster. And on the men's side of it, in a non-title match in which the Intercontinental title champion Dominic Mysterio was involved. Sami Zayn defeated Mysterio. Braun Breaker, who was jumped during the match by LA Knight, and there's some talk that Knight might be moving to Raw to confront Seth Rollins, and Penta. And the main event saw Gunther regain the WWE World Heavyweight title from Jey Uso in 22 minutes. And what some are calling a bit of a surprise result. So that's all that happened on last night's Monday Night Raw. Now getting ready to look ahead to tonight's NXT. As of course, NXT's Trick Williams coming off of this successful title defense against Elijah at this past, not NXT but TNA World title defense at this past Friday's Against All Odds pay-per-view. Tonight's card we'll see in a tag team match Tony D'Angelo and Luca Crucifino, the family, taking on a mystery team. Ethan Page defends the NXT North American title against Shawn Legacy of Evolve. And Oba Femi defends the NXT title against Jasper Troy. So that's all we got for the wrestling wrap-up tonight. As I said, we're trying to get through this real quickly here. So now, with today being Tuesday, June the 10th, 2025, let's take a look back at this day in Neat history. So first off, I'm going to head back 30 years ago today. As on this date 30 years ago today, Triangle Stats Catnapped premiered in Japanese theaters on this day in, of course, it's known outside of Japan as Catnapped. It's Totozen Neko no Kumi Banipal Wit. The 1995 Japanese anime fantasy comedy film, directed, created, and written by Takashi Nakamura, who was also its character designer. So anyways, so on this date, 30 years ago today, Catnap premiered in Japanese theaters. Triangle Stats Catnap. So now moving ahead to the next piece in each history, as we move ahead to the year 2000. On this date in the year 2000, Combat Zone Wrestling held its Caged to the End event from Sewell, New Jersey, on this date back in 2010. The main event saw in a match for the CZW Junior Heavyweight title in a steel cage scaffold match, Rick Blade became the champion by defeating Justice Payne. Of course, Justice Payne, one of a few wrestlers who pulled multiple duty tonight, as he would wrestle more than once during the night. In a three-way dance, Mercury, guy known as Joey Mercury in the WWE, won a three-way dance from Nick Mondo and Ty Street. As we said earlier in the evening, Justice Payne and Wife Beater defeated Nick Gage and Zandig for the BJW, or Big Japan Wrestling Tag Team titles, in a match for the CZW Iron Man title, Light Bulb's Death Match. Wife Beater, who was, again, another one of those who had multiple matches on the evening, lost the title to Madman Pondo. In a singles match for the CZW Tag Team titles, Johnny Kashmere would defeat Russ Haas. And the night opened up with another member, with another individual who pulled multiple duty tonight. Nick Gage defeated Nick Burke in a tables match. Combat Zone Wrestling was basically a hardcore wrestling federation based out of like New Jersey, based out of the northeast portion of the country. All right, so with that, we do have one more piece of niche history to go through, and I believe that will be from 2015. Next up is 2015, which was, of course, 10 years ago today. On this date, 10 years ago today, the 15th issue of Black Science from Image Comics went on sale on this date back in 2015. Sold for $3.50. Was 28 pages. It was written by Rick Remender with art by Matteo Scalia, and Moreno D'Annunzio did the coloring. So that's all I got for you tonight, guys, for tonight's show. I hope everybody enjoyed the show. We'll be back with more Neats News tomorrow, of course. Also, this Sunday, don't forget Apex from Apex Cons will be joining me as we'll be taking another trip down Comics History Lane. Got 2 more weeks of our May coverage of 1940 before we move on to June. So with that, I thank everybody for being here tonight, and I hope to see everybody back here tomorrow. Bye.